it's my pleasure to introduce to you Esslin Terrighena. Hopefully I said that correctly the last name. So Dr. Esslin Terrighena. So she will speak to us on her experiences and knowledge with dealing with anxiety, which we definitely have all dealt with before. So please welcome Dr. Esslin Terrighena.
Hi, can you hear me without a microphone? I'm trying to coordinate all three things now. Okay, so thanks for coming this morning. I know in Hong Kong everyone kind of goes through their personal scheduling nightmare, so I really appreciate you found the time this morning to come and join the talk, and I do hope that some of it will be useful to you in some sort of way. So I'm a chartered psychologist, and I work with a wide range of techniques, both in one-on-one consultations, but also in workshops. But my real passion lies in working with emotions, so understanding our emotions, understanding the roots of our emotions, working on accepting them, and working with them rather than trying to overcome or suppress them. Which leads me on to what we're talking about today. So I'm guessing obviously you've come here because you're interested in anxiety, or maybe you know someone who struggles with anxiety, maybe you've experienced some of those symptoms, the symptoms of anxiety yourself. So I'm hoping to provide a few nuggets of thought on how we can harness our anxiety and use it for our benefit. What is anxiety? The worry about something bad happening, the worry that something that has happened will have some bad effect. Uncertainty, the uncertainty of an outcome and or a situation. Now, anxiety is different for everyone, and I really want to emphasize before I start that I'm going to be talking about subclinical anxiety, which means anxiety that we experience, occasionally in our lives, experience, something that makes us anxious, but not something that's so debilitating that we can't function at all for longer periods of time. So not clinical anxiety, not severe panic attacks, not severe phobias, because that's not something I want to address in a 20-minute talk. Subclinical anxiety. So we differentiate fear and anxiety. Fear is something that you're afraid of that is a real threat, a real danger. And vice versa, anxiety is a fear or the anxiety of something that's perceived, of a perceived threat, an imagined threat. So something that's not a real threat to you, but we big it up to make it something that scares us. And so, for example, if you're going on your morning walk up the peak and you come across an angry wild boar, then that's a real threat, okay? And you're scared, you're experiencing fear. If you're presenting your work, so I'm assuming a lot of you are creative people, if you're presenting your work to someone or you've got an exhibition and you start worrying, are people going to like it? Is this time and money investment I've made, is it going to incur a loss? Those kind of things. We're creating an anxiety in us. We're worrying about something that hasn't happened yet. It's a perceived threat, and that's where anxiety comes in. So what do we do when we're anxious? We ruminate. We keep thinking over and over about the same thought, and we're worrying, we're stressing out about something that has happened or something that will happen. I'll give you an example from my life because I think it makes it maybe more concrete. So I grew up in an environment where there were really clear guidelines on what a good and a bad person was. And unfortunately for me, some of those things that supposedly make a good person, or some of the things that would be associated with a bad person, were things that I thought were quite fun. Okay, so say for example, being adventurous, staying out after midnight, taking risks, getting your nose pierced. And so the anxiety in me was born that somehow if I like the things that make a bad person, then maybe I'm actually not a good person. Maybe I am truly a bad person, and maybe I'm just pretending to be good. And people might notice, and so I start getting anxious that people will notice that I'm this imposter and will reject me. So what do we do? What's happening in that situation is that worry becomes our way of relating with the world around us. We start painting our own reality. So we're painting a reality, we're painting scenarios, and we do this with so much depth and so much dimension and colour, and we're creating our own emotions over things that haven't actually yet happened, or things that aren't quite the objective reality, things that we imagine. And this distress, this can affect us on lots of different levels. It can affect us physiologically, it can affect us behaviourally, emotionally, and also it affects our thoughts. Now, anxiety isn't all about ruminative thoughts. It can also be just an emotion that's suddenly triggered. So you might be feeling just fine and suddenly you get all anxious. There's a feeling of, I don't know, maybe falling, or like the floor's being pulled out underneath you, or just that knot at the back, the pit of your stomach. And that's based on habituation, so we habitually fall into these feeling patterns. And it can also come out in psychosomatic ways, so we might not even know that it's anxiety. We might be getting lots of headaches all the time, or back pain, and other things like maybe your body gets more inflamed more easily, those kind of things. And because we're social animals, anxiety is also contagious, and fear is contagious. So now we're not only painting our own reality with our thoughts and creating our own reality, but we're also painting it for other people around us. Don't know if you've had this, but if you're sitting next to someone who's really anxious at work, you start kind of picking up on that and wondering whether you're still okay, you're on the right track. And the other fun thing about anxiety is that if we're having a really good day and we're excited and we're really infatuated with life, we suddenly kind of go, there's this nagging feeling, be cautious, like curb your enthusiasm. And that's something that's kind of come up, or that we've maybe grown up when our parents tried to protect us when we were children, to not be so excited so that we don't get so much of the disappointment when things do go wrong. So we've given ourselves an upper limit to how much joy we're allowed to experience, how enthusiastic we're allowed to be about life. And funnily though, we don't put that upper limit on anxiety because that's what we believe will keep us safe and protected. So thoughts, emotions, behaviours and brain pathways. Now anxiety, I don't know if you guys have this with your anxiety, but certainly for me it can be the case. Anxiety is a really uncomfortable feeling, but it can become a safety blanket. Sometimes we're like, I don't want to be anxious, but actually, are we really ready to let it go? Or is it something that we think keeps us safe, even though it's uncomfortable? And it's because we've become good at anxiety. We become experts at our own anxiety. So it becomes easier for us to follow those pathways. Now, these 4 things all interact with each other to maintain anxiety. So for example, say you're a bit nervous about going to a party, so you're avoiding perhaps a social event. You start thinking about it, you start going, I don't think people will like me, I have to talk to people and I'm uncomfortable. And so your emotions start going, and that's not just anxiety, that can be sadness or guilt or stress or shame, any of those kind of emotions. So you get wound up. And then as a result, your behaviour, you might avoid to go to the party. So you just go, never mind, I won't go there. And what happens is that when you're sitting at home, your brain reinforces that and says, it's a good thing you didn't go, because look, now you're still safe. And in a way, that avoidance behaviour will keep maintaining those anxious thought patterns, because we don't get feedback that actually going to the party wouldn't have hurt us, and going to the party might have actually been joyful. But we don't get that feedback. So our thoughts go, yeah, I was right, it was right to be anxious. And so we keep maintaining that kind of pattern. And it can go the other way around too. You might be, for example, physiologically, you might have health anxiety, you might be worried about staying healthy and all the diseases you could be getting. And so you start thinking about it, you start getting anxious. Now what that does is it releases stress hormones, it heightens your blood pressure, and it does a lot of different things in your body, and that can then affect your immune system, and it can affect your cardiovascular health, and it can affect your digestive system. And then as a result, you might actually start feeling sick, and you might start getting sick, and then that reinforces your thought pattern. I was right. I was going to get sick and there's nothing I can do to protect myself, and so the anxiety gets reinforced and the pattern gets maintained. I want to talk real brief about brain pathways because that's a big part of anxiety. There's a lot of different regions involved in anxiety, but I want to talk mainly about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So the prefrontal cortex is just about here at the front, and it's responsible, or it's involved in our higher cognitive thinking, so our thoughts, our behavioral regulation, and it's basically our executive functioning. What we do in our everyday when we're working, when we're concentrating, those kind of things. And then the amygdala is a brain region that's much deeper inside. It's quite an old brain structure, and it's responsible for emotion. So it's our emotion center, and it kind of converts the incoming signals. It alerts the brain of fear, and it lets all the rest of the brain know that there's some threat that we have to attend to. And so the prefrontal cortex has a relationship to the amygdala, that the more activity you have here in your thinking part, the less activity the amygdala will produce, or the less active the amygdala is, let's say. And so in plain speak, that essentially means our thoughts can down-regulate our emotions. Now, that's not a new concept, but it can also, of course, go the other way around. So if you're really anxious all the time, then the amygdala won't be regulated, okay? Because your thoughts are enhancing that fear, and they're enhancing the activity in the amygdala. And as a result, you need smaller and smaller triggers for that amygdala to fire, because that brain pattern, that pathway becomes really imprinted and really easy to access. And that's how our brains work. The easier a pathway is to access, the faster we get triggered into going down that pathway. So our brain structures really can help maintain that anxiety, and also, just keeps us in that pattern really quickly. Now, the good news, of course, is that brain structures can be changed. Our brain constantly builds new connections and new networks. And so by changing our thoughts and behaviors, we can actually also change the brain pathway. But the problem, of course, is that because it's so habitual, it takes a little bit of time, persistence, and patience. So what I'd like to really talk about today is the key element that I want to talk about today, is that if we use our emotions rather than trying to suppress them, we can use the information that our emotions contain. So emotion is information. Emotion evolved to be information. So, say our ancestors were sitting, say, around the campfire, for lack of a better example, and they heard a cracking branch somewhere. Now, there's no threat necessarily there immediately, but it will trigger anxiety because there might be the presence of a predator. And that anxiety gives them the chance to go, actually, we're going to retreat and move somewhere else, or we're going to prepare for an attack or whatever. So that's still different to fear, because the predator isn't face-to-face with you at that point. But anxiety is protective. Anxiety has the information that there's something around us that might be a threat. And also social anxiety, right? We need to live in groups to survive. Maybe not so much today, but I still reckon we do. But definitely in the past. So if you notice in your social group someone's a bit off with you, you might get anxious, and that will tell you, okay, I need to readjust my behaviour somehow. So that you don't get rejected and have to survive on your own. And so our brain is wired to look out for potential threat, which is why it's so easy for us to fall into these patterns of anxiety. So emotion tells us that there's something going on that we need to attend to. And it will make it so if we feel good about something, we want to approach it, right? So, I don't know, meeting your friend feels good. Eating chocolate feels good. Coffee this morning, lifesaver, right? So that really helps us to approach something, and vice versa. Someone pointing a gun at you probably feels bad, and someone, if there's a rotting food in the garbage, that will feel bad. So then we're withdrawing from that. And so emotion helps us make our survival decisions, and it also helps us maintain our memory, because our memory is actually not as good as we think. So you might find yourself walking down the street in Hong Kong, and you start feeling a bit funky about something, a bit anxious, but you're not sure why because there's actually nothing there. And that might have been because 3 weeks ago you were busy walking down the street typing on your phone, which I'm sure no one here does ever, and somehow your brain registered that another person almost walked into a car. You didn't notice this, okay? But your brain is always on alert, and your brain saw it, okay? And so it's kind of associated that particular corner of Hong Kong with danger. And it's just trying to tell you, be a little bit more alert. Just look after yourself because something dangerous has happened here, and you were around there, and you've remembered this, but you don't consciously know it. So, I mean, isn't our brain amazing, right? Like, in lots of different ways, it does a lot that we don't actually know. So, you know, why fight the brain? Why not use the knowledge that it has and try and learn about our triggers? So, coming to the last slide, how do we harness this anxiety? How do we know about our triggers and use that? Now, anxiety is different for everyone, so this is not a blanket solution. This is what works for me, and I know works for other people. It's things we've used in therapy, but it's not something that, you know, you can just apply, everyone can go home and never be anxious again. It's not how this is going to work, unfortunately. So first of all, what do you do in the moment? Now, I'm sure you've all heard that great phrase, yeah, just breathe. All right? Does everyone know how to breathe when they're anxious? Yeah? Okay. So it's not really just about breathing. So I'm sure you've all heard of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So they work in an equilibrium, and the sympathetic nervous system gets activated when you need to sharpen your senses and you need to be alert and you need to be ready to tackle something, fight or flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite of that. So it's when you're relaxing and you're being calm and, you know, maybe you're in a food coma after food, you're in your parasympathetic nervous system. And they can't be activated at the same time because they're in an equilibrium, but you can kind of influence which one's running your body at what point in time. And the way you do that is, yes, you do breathe, but there's a system to breathing. And the idea is that your out-breath has to be twice as long as your in-breath. Let's actually do an exercise. Do we have time for an exercise? Okay, we'll do an exercise together. So I invite you to, if you're comfortable with it, just sit comfortably and close your eyes for a minute. I quite like that, no one can see me now. Yes. And we're going to do a breathing exercise. And the way it's going to work, I'll explain first, is that we'll breathe in a big breath to the count of 4. We'll hold it for 7 counts, and we'll breathe out for 8 counts. Now, I know some people are not comfortable holding their breath, so if that's the case, please don't do it. Okay, so just breathe in on the count of 4 and breathe out on the count of 8 in your own time. But if you're comfortable holding your breath, just go with me on this. So we'll take a big breath in together. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we hold it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a big breath out through your mouth. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a couple of normal breaths in between. And then we'll do the whole cycle again. Take a deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a deep breath out through your mouth. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a couple of normal breaths in between. And we'll do it one more time. So big breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a deep breath out on 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, you can open your eyes again. How's everyone feeling? Don't say more nervous or anxious, that's not the right answer, okay? So the idea is that your out-breath becomes more deliberate and more controlled, because you realise after the first couple of times, if you want to get to 8, you need to actually focus on your breath and make sure it comes out slowly. This works well in a couple of ways. First of all, the physiological effect. If your out-breath is longer than your in-breath, your parasympathetic nervous system tends to get activated. But also you're focusing on your breathing and your counting, which keeps your mind something to do, that isn't ruminating and worrying and thinking about other stuff. Okay. What else can we do? We can reflect on our emotions. So the problem with anxiety is we've maintained little habits and we don't actually know what they are. And we'll just keep going into the same pattern. In fact, we might actually go, oh, I guess that's just who I am now. I guess I'm just that anxious person now. And that's not the case. I can promise you that. You are not an anxious person, but you might have some anxiety, okay? And you can change that, but reflecting on emotions and really asking why. Why are they there? Where are they coming from? That can help you start understanding them. Talk it through with a friend, talk it through with a professional if that's something you want to do, but just find yourself asking why. Why am I feeling anxious? And what lines up with that? First of all, it reality checks your emotions and it can help you understand your triggers. What lines up with that is mindfulness, which I'm sure it's a trendy word being thrown around a lot today. But mindfulness, bringing yourself into the moment and really trying to observe with curiosity in a non-judgmental way. So you start getting anxious, what's going on in my body? How am I feeling? What are my thoughts? Because if you start observing before you immerse yourself in a reaction, then you create a space for yourself. You create that space where you can stop and pause and then decide, am I going to immerse myself or am I going to do something else? And it takes a little bit of practice. So the first few times you'll be like, this is useless, rubbish talk. But if you kind of do it regularly, you'll get into the habit of doing it and you're changing those brain patterns. You're making the prefrontal cortex stronger and you're making it more easy. You're making it easier to regulate your emotions. That also ties in with preparation. Always try and find to have a plan B, because a lot of our anxiety is that we feel we can't control the outcome. And sometimes we can't and bad things happen and that's reality, right? But we can try to prepare as well as we can, and that also strengthens our higher executive functioning. Fact check your thoughts, challenge your anxiety-provoking thoughts. What's the evidence for this thought? Is it real? What's the evidence against this thought? How likely is it that something really bad is going to happen? What are the consequences of that? So just keep questioning yourself. Question the reality you've painted. Fact check the story you've told yourself against that reality, and you'll find that anxiety starts dissolving. Finally, I want to talk about setting challenges. So remember that story I told you before, the good person, the bad person, the imposter. So the anxiety that was created in me. So I was really fortunate because I became independent when I turned 18. So I went down a very anxiety-inducing journey, but it allowed me to test my anxiety, allowed me to explore my anxiety. And so I started testing beliefs, and back then I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to see if the beliefs that I had were true. So, for example, there was a general rule, hitchhikers are bad. Okay, hitchhikers are bad people. So I started hitchhiking, because, that's what you do, right? So I wanted to test, am I really a bad person? So I hitchhiked through Mexico and Guatemala and Botswana. And I picked up people, when I was driving, I'd pick up hitchhikers. And what I found is I met the most amazing people. I met, artists and farmers and doctors and just people with really big hearts and a lot of love and kindness. And it tested that belief and it reality checked it. And I went, okay, I don't think they're bad people, so maybe I'm not such a bad person. And that's how I tried to challenge my anxiety. By the way, I'm not encouraging you to hitchhike. Be safe, okay? Especially not in Mexico or Guatemala, or any of the countries I just named. But yeah, you get the idea, right? It also gave me the chance to understand my anxiety, as in where is it located in my body. So I love traveling, I thrive on traveling, but it gives me anxiety because it's new, it's uncertain, you don't know anyone, you don't know the language. And I've noticed a difference between tingling anxiety, which kind of I have somewhere across my chest, and then that knot in the pit of your stomach. So I go for my tingling anxiety. If I'm tingling, I okay, this scares me, but I should probably try it because it'll be rewarding. And that's been habit and practice. If it's a kind of at the pit of my stomach kind of anxiety, then that danger's too real, so I don't do it, okay? So what am I trying to say to you? I'd say if you want to challenge your anxiety, do it. It can be so, so rewarding. But go in baby steps, okay? And try and go with the tingling. Don't go with that knot in the pit of your stomach, because that's just going to stress you out more. See where you're slightly tingling. And for you, that might be, you know, talking to a stranger at a party, or picking up the phone, or even a tingling before you leave the house. So don't go all in straight away. Be patient, be persistent, and yeah, find your tingling, and that's where you can start. All right? So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Esslin. Do we have any questions? Q&A? Don't go away yet. I see Juliet has arrived. Say hi. Juliet, if you guys don't know, Juliet's the real OG of Creative Mornings Hong Kong. So without her, we would not be in existence. So she's come to Hong Kong for a week, here until Wednesday. Yeah, just to kind of say hey.
Hi. I have zero anxiety right now.
So we can open the floor to questions if anyone has questions, stories. Now's the chance.
Do you think anxiety is becoming a bigger issue, like, throughout time? Do you think it's now a bigger issue than it ever has been, and why do you think that is so?
Okay. I think that we do have, that social media has a big influence on anxiety, because we all feel constantly under, not surveillance is not the right word, but we're constantly being observed, we're constantly being seen. You have to have a social media presence, you have to, you know, so I think that creates anxiety, because we get more worried, and we all know there's internet bullies, right? And they're hiding behind the keyboard, and words do hurt, so, you know, every time we put something up, we might think, oh, you know, am I going to get a backlash from that? I looked up a few statistics. Hong Kong has very inconsistent statistics about mental health at times. And I'm saying this very carefully because I found it a bit difficult because they were so all over the place. Apparently, mental health in terms of depression and anxiety is quite similar in Hong Kong compared to other countries. But supposedly in the working world, up to 25% of people said they had anxiety, and they had work-related anxiety, and it was particularly high if they felt they were doing a lot of overtime, had a lot of work pressure. So I think in Hong Kong we can probably say there is a lot of increasing anxiety, maybe more in the city compared to 200 years ago, but that's really hard to say as well because we don't know what it was like, and the anxiety would have probably just been different as well. It wouldn't have been on such a grand scale that now we put something online and the whole world can technically read it. So I think anxiety is taking a different shape. I don't want to say whether it's increasing or not, but it's certainly taking a different shape.
I'm sorry. Okay. You mentioned that. Oh, sorry. Oh, actually, go ahead. Sure. She pointed. No, it's okay. Here, go first. Take a look. Say it out. You mentioned that anxiety is contagious, and I would agree with that. But then, what is your strategy on avoiding? I mean, it's not just about avoiding people that you find anxious. So how do you? What's your advice on that?
Don't have anxious friends. No, I'm kidding. I think first of all, you need to center yourself. So dealing with your own anxiety, because that gives you a much better ground to work from. So if someone next to you is anxious, but you sort of know ways to manage your own anxiety, it won't affect you as much. I also think being an ally to people with anxiety is actually a good thing because you know, you're wanting to create an environment that we can all thrive in. And if you know someone who's really anxious and you're feeling like you're having a good day, you're feeling safe and protected yourself, don't go in if you're feeling super anxious, perhaps, but you know, if you can avoid it. But if you're feeling centered in yourself, go and chat to them. Why are they being anxious? You know, maybe take that moment to let them share, if that's what they want to do. and help them to fact check, you know, and I think we all do that almost instinctively. If a friend comes up to you and says, you know, I'm so worried about this presentation tomorrow, then, you know, I'll have friends that go, okay, so what exactly are you worried about? How likely do you think that is? Why does that worry you? Is that something that, you know, is it a trigger? Why are you so worried about talking in front of strangers? Is there something bad that has happened in the past? So maybe just go down the line of questioning and help them to reflect. And I know that doesn't completely answer your question perhaps, because how do you protect yourself from anxiety? I think that just comes back down to you becoming more mindful of how you're feeling in that moment. But, yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Actually, I just want to know how can you break that cycle when that anxiety goes to full-blown panic attack from 0 to 100 in a split second? I just don't know how to overcome that. It's just a little bit of a background. I suffered my whole childhood from bullies because I had a fear of public speaking. But then I had the luxury of starting my first job as a voiceover, so I can move gradually from a voiceover, somebody who doesn't see my face in a studio, to someone who speaks publicly for a living right now. But I'm trying to help my niece and nephew who's having that same problem that I had as a kid. They're being bullied for the same thing, and it's just full-blown panic attack. Can you actually give me some pointers to see how they can actually break out of that?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say this is a really good example, so thank you for sharing, of how you challenge yourself bit for bit and in baby steps, and you don't go full on from panicking about public speaking to now I do it for a living, right? So you gradually progressed along the way. So this is what we all do in our lives, right? As for the panic attacks, okay. As for the panic attacks, I purposely didn't want to speak about those today because there just really isn't, without looking at the case, there's nothing that you can say that I can just apply to everyone that will snap you out of panic attacks. It is a breathing, if you're there with them, you know, just trying to keep them calm and breathing through it, but sometimes panic attacks just ride out, and it's better to get professional advice based on, you know, someone who knows them and someone who's talked to them and knows what their triggers are, because once you know the triggers, you can try to preempt them. Once the panic attack has started, it's very difficult because what's going on in your head is you think you're dying, right? You're like, okay, now I feel my heart racing, so clearly I'm getting a heart attack, and my hands are shaking, I can't feel my fingers, so now I'm dying, right? That's essentially what all panic attacks typically come to. When you're in that state, it's very hard to pull someone out of it. But if you practice that mindfulness, if you practice the, okay, now my heart's racing, but you give yourself that space, that doesn't mean I'm dying. If you practice that on a daily basis, it becomes more habitual and the brain pathway will establish. And then hopefully when the panic attack starts, they can step back and go, actually no, we've practiced this, it's not going to be the end, it's happened before, you know, let's just work through it. But it's very hard to just click your fingers and snap someone out of it. That's, yeah, unfortunately I can't really give you a pointer in that sense. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
You mentioned how trendy mindfulness is, I think was the word you used. I was wondering why you thought that was. Is it because as a society we're becoming more open and more willing to talk about these things publicly at this event, or do you attribute it to something else?
That's a really good question. I've thought about that a lot myself, actually. So I've personally meditated since I was 12, on and off over the years. And so to me, mindfulness has always been around. And I feel that now it's become, probably because we have become more open and because we realise we can't stress ourselves out and work ourselves to the bone and these kind of things, that we've like now turned to techniques that are rooted in Asia and techniques that are rooted in ancient Asian practices, such as meditation, which, you know, is related to mindfulness. So your question was why I think that is?
Why has it become more
so trendy,
popular?
yeah.
Well, it's been around for thousands of years, as you said, so why is it now on everybody's mind?
I think, like I said, I think we've just exhausted our own resources in a way. I mean, behaviorism was really big, I'm going to say 60, 70 years ago, but my maths is awful. Anyway, and that was really kind of bypassing emotions and just saying this is our behavior, and the reason we do this behavior is because the consequence is a reward or a punishment. And so if we continue doing some behavior that punishes us, we'll automatically stop because it's uncomfortable, and vice versa. If we get a reward, that will increase our behavior. And theoretically, behavior does work that way, but it completely bypassed emotions. And then emotions became more important because we realized we're not really robots that just function on that behavioral level. And I think with that has now also come the mindfulness and being aware, because we're looking for more avenues to find well-being in what, in the stressful situations. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.